Welcome to the module on Azure Backup. In this session, we will cover essential aspects of Azure Backup and how to protect your files and virtual machines. Imagine waking up one day to find that all your critical data has vanished due to a system failure or a cyber attack. The consequences could be catastrophic, leading to lost revenue, damaged reputation, and countless hours spent trying to recover what was lost. This is where Azure Backup comes into play. It acts as your digital safety net, ensuring that your data is always secure and recoverable, no matter what happens. Let's explore what Azure Backup is and how it works, using the Azure Business Continuity Center, backing up Azure file shares and virtual machines. Now, let's go into more details on how we manage backups in Azure environments. Using Azure Business Continuity Center, we can start creating solutions for our backup. Particularly when we are looking to manage our backups, one of the key things that you're going to be looking at is creating a vault. Now, this vault is where all your backups will be held. Now, a few things that come to mind when we are creating these solutions as part of the backup. Typically, you'll create a vault in a particular region. Now, it's important to remember that if you're backing up resources from a particular region, they can only be backed up into the same vault that is part of the same region. So you won't be able to back up the resources into a different region. Now, if you're looking for a solution that goes spanning across different regions, we have Azure Site Recovery for that type of solution, which we'll touch on briefly at the end. For now, let's move on to talking about some more details. Now, part of my vaults where I define how or what it's going to back up, I need to start creating backup policies on defining what it's backing up, how frequently it does that, and how many times does it kick in, and the retention period of some of that data that we are going to back up, which is all defined as part of my backup policy. Now, typically when you are backing up in Azure using vaults, there are two different types of vaults that are available to us. We have a backup vault and a recovery service vault, which we are going to look into a bit more detail in today's session. Now, when you are creating these vaults, an easier way to manage some of this would be using a Business Continuity Center. Now, the Business Continuity Center provides us a single pane of glass view of how to manage all the different options that you're configuring in your backup. Now, if we have a quick look at that on the slide, this is where we can see if I'm configuring loads of different solutions of my backup, I can simply see what's currently backed up, what policies are configured, how many vaults I've got running in my environment, what services have failed, what succeeded, when they're planned to run. All of that information can be found in one place. Even though you're backing up, for example, virtual machines or Azure file shares, and you're bringing other data to your backups, we can configure them from individual resources. But monitoring and managing that becomes much more easier with Business Continuity Center. Now let's have a look at some of this on the portal. Right, I'm back into the portal. At this point, we are going to start looking at the Business Continuity Center, and we'll dive into that straight away. Now, as I go into it, I can see certain settings that I already have configured in my environment. I'll leave them alone for now, but we'll go into looking at some more details that we need to be working with today's demo. Now, as I scroll down in my overview tab, I can see it's giving me information around different resources that are protectable, protection status around some of them. I can see some coverage that I can have in terms of how good things are. I can change some of those. I can monitor if things are backing up, if there were any alerts running around them, and if they're compliant to some of my policies that I'm running in Azure policies, if there were any. Now, if I go back in here into my Business Continuity Center's blade, I can scroll down to the bottom of this and I can start looking at vaults that we can work with. Now let's start looking at some of the details in here. I have a vault already running, but let's create another vault for now. Now, in this case, I have two options. Like I mentioned before, we can choose RSV or service or recovery service vault, or we can choose a backup vault in this case. However, both of these offer different options for me to work with. For instance, the backup vault now supports quite a few options over here. Things like if I'm backing up Azure disks, looking at blob storage, and quite a few other solutions, including my Kubernetes services that are available for me to work with. However, if I look at my recovery service vault, which we are planning to work with in this part of the session, we can see some of the options that it caters for us in this scenario, looking at Azure virtual machines, which we are interested in today's session. And then we have some other options like Azure Files. We can have a look at some of that as well. Now, it can cater for some other options that are part of this setup, but for now, we'll leave them out. So let's start building a recovery service vault and hit continue onto that. Some basic tabs that we are going to plug in. Basic details in the basic tab that we'll plug in. So let's start calling this our AZ104 demo vault. So we'll give it that name, and so let's create this. I'm leaving this in UK South because most of the resources that we've created in this session or these sessions are all around in this region. So we'll leave that as my vault region as well. If I'm planning for redundancy, I can't choose that option at this stage. At this point, I can say, create me a geo redundancy. We've spoken about some of these options as part of my storage solution. So we have similar solutions available over here. So I can say, make this local redundant, zone redundant, or geo redundant. I'll leave it as local redundant for now. However, if I go and choose geo redundant, I have options over here to choose cross region store, and I can enable that. But we'll leave some of those details out for right now and move along. Again, encryption, this becomes very, very interesting as we create our backups and have our backups kept in our recovery service vault. Last thing we want is somebody being able to access that backup and take all the data that we are working with in our environment. So we want to make sure that data that's in the back end is kept secure with encryption. So if somebody does manage to gain access to it, which we will try to see if they don't, they can't get what's inside of the backups that we have. So we can work with resources like Microsoft Management Keys that can be implemented as part of that, or we can bring the customer managed keys. Again, if you're going to do that, please ensure you are storing your keys in a suitable solution, something like Azure Key Vault. Now, if I go further, we have vault properties over here. In this, we can enable immutability if there is a requirement for me to maintain certain backups for a duration of time. Maybe it's a constraint that I have because of a compliance or a standard or legislation that I need to ensure that happens. Then I can enable this. This will ensure that data in my backup is never deleted until it's past that policy that I can implement as part of the immutable policy in here. For now, we'll leave that out. In terms of networking, again, we've mentioned similar solutions with many other services that we've implemented. Do I allow access directly from the internet to my resource from all different networks, or do I need to change some of that and say, let's not allow direct access to the backup recovery service vault from anywhere else on the internet apart from certain networks that we would like people to be able to connect to, either to retrieve this data or see what the backups are there or what the policies are, or to make some changes to some of the settings that we are creating. So we can control some of that. For now, we'll leave it public simply because it'll make it easier for me to connect to it right now. Otherwise, it's probably a bit more safe for me to change that setting and deny public access directly to it. And that's all I'm going to do for now. I'm going to hit create and review, and let's see how this vault looks like when it's ready. All right, as you can see, the deployment is completed. Let's go into the vault and let's have a look at some details. Now, this is my recovery service vault, as you can see on the menu on the top. So now we are in Business Continuity Center. However, we are now looking at the vault that we just created called AZ104 Demo. Now, let's look at some details in here before we go into start doing things with it. First of all, what I want to do is go into the properties for this vault. This is where you can start configuring some details around how we manage this particular recovery service vault. Now, if I go into it, I have options that we can explore things like, do I need to create the immutability settings? Currently, I've not enabled it. I can look into enabling it. It's telling me it's poor settings because I don't have some of the security features added to this. I must go and do them. I can also enable soft delete options over here, so I can go into that and decide if I need soft delete enabled for my backup. By default, it has soft delete enabled, and by default, it's around 14 days worth of data that it retains in soft delete. Now, this particular option suggests that this data kept for 14 days is for free of cost. However, I have now options to change that time period to be longer. But if you do decide to go any longer than 14 days, it does suggest that you will incur additional charges. So this is something that it comes down to your need for the solution that you're working on. And if you need to enable that, by all means do. However, bear that in mind, that if it's going to be retained for more than 14 days, you are going to incur charges onto that. Now, apart from that, if you are looking to make changes to your recovery service vault or delete it or do other things with it, sometimes you're asked to verify a security PIN. Typically, this PIN is generated in the properties of the recovery service vault. So this is typically where you'll go and hit generate and create that PIN for you to be able to verify the changes that you're making to your settings. Now, apart from looking at some details within my recovery service vault properties, let's go back out into my recovery service vault and start looking at currently options I can back up. Now, there's nothing currently running in this environment, as this is part of my business continuity center. I get to see everything in one place. I can manage how many things are configured. I can see if I need to go and change some settings around some of the options I'm backing up while I'm in this option. Now, let's start with some backups in this part of the session. Let's start going into backup. Now, the first thing that we want to back up today is looking at an Azure virtual machine. Now, my resource that I'm working with is currently in the cloud in Azure, so it's native to the recovery service vault that we are working with. So this setup should be straightforward. It doesn't require me to do any further configuration. I can simply hit the backup button in here and go into creating a backup policy that it's required for me to complete. Now, I have a couple of different options to create this policy. Now, if I see I have a standard policy that I can run, the standard policy will do one backup a day and will have up to 5 days of operational tier retention of that data that we'll back up. Or we can go into enhanced version of backup, which we are going to create today, simply because the virtual machines that we are backing up, they require this particular feature, because the virtual machines that we created in our demos, they are based on the trusted launch virtual machines. Again, secure virtual machines, so it will require me to use the enhanced version. However, this allows me to do multiple backups in a day and keep up to 30 days on operational tier retention on these backups. So let's go with this. Again, nice to know that it can also cater for virtual machines with ultra and premium SSDs in this solution. Now, the current backup policy that it has, it's given me a name called enhanced policy. And I can see as it shows me over here, this is the current backup policy that is picking up automatically. If you want to change any of these settings, by all means, don't rely on the default settings that pop up. You can always go into saying, hey, let's create some of this. I don't want to pick this up as default. You can go and change this. As we said, we can do multiple backups in a day. I can do hourly backup. I can decide when the time is, when it's scheduled to run every so frequent, duration. I can decide the time zone it works in, and all sorts of different things. Also choose if they want to have instant recovery snapshots available for me and for how many days. Now, I can also decide the retention period. Currently the default is 30 days. Now I can decide to create and configure weekly backups, monthly backups, or yearly backup points. If there was a need for me, I can enable some of them as part of my policy. Now, I'll leave all of this out. Again, based on your needs, you might change some of these policies. I'll leave the details that I have given to me by default. The important part here is what virtual machine are we backing up? So let's go and hit add to this and start looking at some of the virtual machines that we can back up as part of the setup. Now, we created App Server 3 in our virtual machine module, or IaaS module. So we can go back into that and simply start backing up that one virtual machine, even though I can do multiple at a time. Just for right now, let's pick one and say OK to that. And this is where it's validating the progress to see if it is OK with that. It's happy to add the information in there. It can show me how many disks it has. And if it has any additional disks, I can add them to the list or exclude them from the list if I needed to. Now let's go and enable backup. Now in this part of the session, it's simply enabling a backup policy for a virtual machine that we have running in my environment. It's not actually performing the backup at this stage. Now it's important to understand what your policy dictates in terms of how frequently you should run the backup. When was it designed to run the backup? Now, if you were careful enough to see the time that it was suggesting the backup should start, that's when this policy is going to go and trigger the first backup. Now, if you were just a little bit like me and not paying attention to when the first backup is going to start, then this backup is not going to trigger till that time kicks in. Just wait and see what will happen in a minute. All right, that backup is deployed. Let's go into the resource to find out exactly what is done. Now I'm back onto my recovery service vault that we're working on. This time we can go into my backup items to check the list. So we can see one entry that's made for the virtual machine. There's one item that's been backed up. Let's go and check it out. Now currently I can see the App Server 3 is ready to be backed up. The pre-check is passed. However, still giving me a warning that the initial backup hasn't taken place. So I can go into view more details to remind myself on what my current setup was designed to do. So I can go back and see the jobs on when this is planned to run, how many times it's run, or if there are any alerts. But we're interested in an enhanced policy to remind ourselves that when does it start? It starts at 8 a.m. UTC time zone, and then again it runs every 4 hours after that. Now, we don't want to wait till that time to happen. So what can we do? We can hit the backup now button from in here, or we can take a step back out again one more time and click on the ellipsis that's on the side and choose the option to backup now. Now, I'll hit the backup now button. This will take a few moments to back up that virtual machine, and we'll talk about some other options that are still grayed out, but we can have a discussion around them. Let's choose the retain backup till date. I'll leave it as default for now. All right, let's hit OK to this. Now, while that's triggering the backup to happen right now, we can go back into some of those options that are grayed out, which will become valid for me to look at once the backup is complete. Now, once the backup is ready and completed for me, we have a few options that we can explore as part of this. Now, if at any point I have my virtual machine failing, I can go back and restore this virtual machine from here by clicking on Restore Virtual Machine from this backup. I can decide to stop this backup at any time. So I might have no need for this resource to be backed up, and I can trigger the stop. Now, as I do the stop of the backup, it'll give me a couple of options. Do I want to just stop the backup, or am I looking to delete the backups and the resource that the policy that we've created for this backup? Now, if I do decide to delete it at that point while I'm stopping it, it will simply bring this backup into a deleted state. We still have the soft delete option available in the backend. Now, once this is deleted, it will give me an option to say either I go and undelete this resource to start using it again, or leave it there because the policy currently says 14 days. On the 15th day, it will automatically get rid of that file for me from the soft delete. However, within the 14 days, if I do decide to undelete it, it again comes back into my setup over here in a state where it's stopped and it's not doing anything. So what do I do from that? I can choose to resume it so it comes back into its original state with the original policy that I had implemented onto this, so it can carry on from where the journey of that backup was designed, and it can carry on backing up for me as the policy initially was designed for it. Now let's leave some of these options out and let this machine carry on backing up. Let's move on to the next part of the session and we'll talk about some more details. Now for this part, I am going to go back into my recovery service vault and have a look at some other options to backup. Now let's go back into the backup, and we are still backing up my workloads from Azure. Again, it's native to my recovery service vault. In this case, we are going to look at backing up my Azure file share and go into the details for this. Now, if you remember from the previous sessions, either from the virtual machine or from the storage options, both of these solutions had a backup option built into them when we were creating it, but we left them out because we wanted to back them up using the Business Continuity Center and bring them in here. However, if you're not doing them directly from the resource, you can always come back in here and do the backups or configure the backups for them. You don't have to. You can still manage them from the resource type. Again, this gives you that one plain glass view of everything that you're running in your environment, so you don't have to jump between multiple menus to see some of that. Now let's do a backup for Azure files. Now in this environment, it's asking me to select a storage account. I'll go and choose one. As we can see, it's brought up the storage account that we created in one of the previous demos in the storage account. So we have a Contoso AZ104 demo, the storage account that we created. Let's select that storage account. Select. Now, while we're doing this, one thing that's important to see over here is this. We spoke about resource locks in one of the earlier modules in the course, and I mentioned that's a nice feature to look at to lock your resources down, or your resource groups, or your subscription. Something important to understand: as I start to create a backup of a storage account, the recovery service vault suggests that I lock that storage account. It's obviously important for me to back it up. Also, it suggests that if I lock it, there's less chances of someone going into making an unintentional mistake of deleting certain things from it. So it's asking me to lock the storage account, so no one goes and deletes the storage account from the storage solutions that we have running in our environment. So it offers me to lock them. Now for now, I'll leave that lock out. However, if you're working in the real scenarios, please ensure you keep some of those options available for added security to enable the lock. Let's take the lock off for just this demo and carry on. All right, seems like it's accepted the configuration. So what we are going to do next is, since my storage account is selected, let's go into that and see if I can find any file shares that we were working on to back them up. Now, as part of this storage account that we created in the storage solution or storage modules, we can choose the FS01 that we created, and we can choose this to backup. Now, as part of this, we have to create a policy for the backup before this backup can be configured. So by default, it's choosing me a policy for a full first-time backup. And as I can see, it's going to run daily at 7 p.m. and it's got some other details around the retention. Now, as usual, if you don't like the default policy, by all means, go and create a new policy, give it a new name. We can call it Azure File Policy 1, and that's what we are calling it for now. Now, backup tier is going to be using snapshots to backup, and we'll leave some of those details as they are. How frequently do we want to back this up? We can change this to be hourly. We can choose a daily. So we have a choice over here to define when that happens. Now, apart from that, each backup that we create, how long does it retain? Again, we have options to retain it for up to 30 days as part of the default policy. We can go and configure weekly, monthly backups as part of those options, and we can say OK to it. Now let's leave some of those details as they are. Let's hit OK, and we have a new name for our policy. I don't think I've changed any of the settings in here from default, but if you have a need, by all means, go ahead and do that. Now let's go ahead and enable this backup. All right, the backup has completed, or in fact, the backup setup has completed. Let's go into the resource. We're back onto the recovery service vault. If we go back down into checking that the number of items is backing up, and see, we have a new entry for my Azure files. So if I go into it, again, it confirms that it's backing up some of those resources. Currently, it's not backing up. It's not started the very first backup as yet. So again, some of the options we can look at over here is to go and trigger this backup now. And some of the other options that we discussed, which are similar to the virtual machine options that we had. So we can go ahead and trigger the backup now and leave the backup to run. Again, I'm asked to choose a retention for this. It's picking up some default settings there. I'll leave them as they are for now, and let's hit OK. And this is where it's starting to back up some of my Azure file shares. Now, while this backup is happening, let's move out of this and go back into my recovery service vault for one more time. In this case, we'll go into the backup one more time and have a look at some other options that we can explore. So far, we've been backing up resources that were in Azure. However, we don't have to just stick to those. We can start looking at backing up resources from my on-prem environments as well. So I can decide to pick some options in my recovery service vault to back up resources from on-prem. For example, I could have a file share that's running on my on-prem environment, and I can bring some files and folders to be backed up. In this case, the setup looks slightly different because it's not native to cloud, it's on-prem. It needs certain settings to perform from there. So what I can do is I can hit prepare infrastructure. This means I need to go and prepare my on-prem setup. So if I click on that, a few things to bear in mind over here. As I go ahead and do this, first it's asking me to install an agent, which is a recovery service agent, or in short, MARS agent, which is a Microsoft Recovery Service Agent, or Microsoft Azure Recovery Service Agent, MARS as in the chocolate bar or the planet, whichever you remember it by. Along with that, it's asking me to download a credential file, which is a Vault credential that we need to register once this installation is complete on my resource. Once I'm done with downloading both of them, I'll simply take this agent and install it onto the machine that I have running on-prem, which should obviously have some sort of file shares or files that I need to back up to the cloud Azure backup. Now, in that case, once I go and run this particular recovery service agent, I will need to use this agent to be registered into my recovery service vault in my Azure backup solutions. And for me to do that, I'll simply provide it with this file. Now, once this file is created, you can reuse this for multiple solutions. So if you're backing up multiple servers, simply download this agent and run them. And you can back data from multiple resources on prem. All you need is the same registration file and simply register. Once the registration completes, you'll see a backup solution just like your normal Windows backup solution that runs, but this time it will be an Azure solution running on your environment. Simply what we've done in the cloud, we do the same. You create a policy, you define what files you're backing up, and as a result of that, you'll see some entries in your environment. And this time, if you go into the backup items, you'll see a backup agent suggesting that there's a backup agent that's been used to back up some files from on-prem environments. Now, for one more option to explore, if I was doing backup from on-prem environments and I'm looking at picking up virtual machines, I can do that too. I can back up my virtual machines from hypervisor, from VMware, if I'm looking to do back these up from my on-prem environments. Again, this time they are not native to cloud, they're on-prem. So it's asking me to go and prepare my on-prem infrastructure. Now I can do some of that. However, this part of the session will require me to do slight different installation. So it's asking me to go and install MABS, or Microsoft Azure Backup Server. Now, if you're already running a backup solution on your environment, such as your Data Protection Manager, or if you have SCCM, you might not need to run some of these this map server in your environment. However, if you're not, you can download this from here, provide it with the credential file that you have available here, to work with. And once you've registered that, you should be able to back some of those into the cloud environment. However, we'll leave some of those demos out from this session. Now, once we have done all of our backups, let's jump back into some of the solutions that we were looking at earlier on. So we're looking at backing up our virtual machines. I'm hoping some of them are now ready. So let's quickly check them. So if I go back into my virtual machine, there's a successful backup already available for me to look at. I can simply go back in here and change some of the options that we mentioned before. Remember the soft delete option that's available for us. Also, if I go back into my Azure files, just to confirm that successful backup has been completed, or that backup has been completed successfully, and I can go and take certain other actions if I want to recover or store some files from there. Again, I'll leave some of them out for today's session. Now, as we come to the end of this session, one last topic that I'd like to talk about is site recovery options that you can configure. Now, if I want to go into my site recovery, let's assume that we are going to configure some options to have a site recovery. In case of a disaster, I don't want to have my backups in one region and I want to back them up across a different region. We can enable a replication. Now, if I go into the replication option, this is where it's going to start asking me some basic details, things like the region that you're backing this up to. Now, currently my resources are in UK South. If I choose UK South again, it gives me a warning saying your current recovery service vault is in the same region. So this doesn't work with what you're trying to get over here to back them up in another region. So choose a different region. Now we could go and choose a different region. Let's, for example, say we go into UAE North for this particular part of the session. Now the resource groups that we are creating, currently I don't have a resource group in that region. That's probably not a good choice. I do have some resources running in Central Australia. So I am just going to, or Australia Central. So I'm just going to pick that up because I know I have some resources running there. Otherwise, all you need to do is go and create a resource in that region first to begin with, and simply come in here and choose that. Now I have an existing resource called SC200 that I am going to pick for this part of the session. So we are going to look at backing up this in a different region under a different resource group. And we're going to deploy some of that in there. Now, if I scroll down, let's click on the next option. Now here I can see the virtual machines that I have running in some of my environments. Right, so from here we'll select App Server 11 and let's try see if we can set the replication settings for it. Now, as it takes me to the replication settings, it's asking me to choose a target location. Where am I planning to take this? It's going into West US for me for now. And I can choose my subscription. Again, I'm working within the same subscription. It's creating me a new resource group. As part of that is adding ASR. I can go and choose a different resource if I needed to, if I had one. Again, I can choose a failover virtual network. It's creating me as part of that setup. Also, it's creating me a failover subnet for that resource to be placed in. Now, this is again some of the default settings. By all means, if you're creating this, have a plan in place before you start creating some of these and choose some of these options wisely. For me, I'll simply choose the default settings just for a quick demonstration on how this feature looks like. I'll hit next to this. And based on some of the retention policies, I can see I have a 24-hour retention policy. By all means, look into changing some of that. And all I'm doing is scrolling down to look at some of the settings. Currently, it allows the recovery service to manage everything for me in the backend in terms of the updates. I'll leave that as it is. It requires me to enable automation to this. So that's fine. It's creating a new automation as part of it. Let's hit next. All right, seems like it's created the deployment, it's enabling the replication for that one virtual machine that we have. And I should be able to go and look at some of the details around this over here. As we've enabled the site recovery, this will take some time for it to complete. So in the meantime, what we can do just jump from here, go into the virtual machine directly. Let's have a look at the settings on the virtual machine. Let's have a look back into the portal. So we were doing a disaster recovery for my app server 11. So if I go back into that, I can always check if there's got some of those settings enabled. So all I'm doing is scrolling down to the blades in here to look at any disaster recovery setups for my virtual machine. So if I go into it, I should be able to see that currently there is a target for it to be configured. This is something that we created as part of our business continuity and disaster recovery plans that we were working on, and we enabled it to be backed up again in a different region. So this resource is running in Australia Central. We decided to target this in a US East US, and currently this is where it's doing the disaster recovery for us. All right, while this is still configuring the replication, which can take some time, let's go back a step and have a look at my Business Continuity Center and scroll down to Recovery Service Vault. The vault that we were working on today is AZ104 demo, and go back into the bottom. This time, instead of looking at backup items, we can look at replicated items to find out if it's replicating anything. Now, it's doing the initial replication, which can take some time. So let's go into this to check out again, so we can see the same details. Now, once this initial backup or initial replication is completed, we'll have some of the options available for us to work with. Things like we can go and test failover to see if there was a need and this site crashed, then can we, how long will it take to failover? The failover test would show you some of those details, so feel free to test them out. Or we can simply do a failover and move our resources to the other location that we have chosen. Now, I'm hoping this gives you a good idea on how to use Azure Site Recovery. Now, this brings us to the end of this module. As we conclude this module on Azure Backup, let's recap on the key points we've covered. We explored the essential aspects of Azure Backup, including how to protect your virtual machines and the importance of having a robust backup strategy to safeguard your data against unexpected events. Remember, Azure Backup acts as your digital safety net, ensuring that your data is always secure and recoverable, no matter what happens. By implementing the strategies and the tools discussed in this module, you can enhance your organization's resilience and ensure the continuity in the face of challenges. Remember to review the reference modules and check your knowledge with the additional study materials provided on Microsoft Learn using aka.ms/learn. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you in the next session.